So, you've got what you want to read.
Yeah, it's there. I'll stand up over there then.
Well, can everyone hear me? Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Jaipur. And I wanted to say to begin that for 30 years, readers from around the world have been looking in particular, more than anyone else, to one man for a kind of specially witty, provocative, and truthful take on sex, literature, politics, and the state of England. And that's Hanif Kureishi, whom we have in front of you today. Hanif is here this year with a new novel, The Last Word. And it's a book about a lot of people who all want to have the kind of last word in every day and in every scene, so which just kind of explains the sort of electricity of it. I didn't want to speak too much about the book because Hanif will read some from it, and by that time, when he's finished, we'll all know the premise of the story, and then we can ask some questions about it. Hanif, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. This is a bit apart from the first chapter. The last word. Harry knew that not a moment of the day passed when someone wasn't telling a story. And if his luck held for the rest of the day, Harry was about to be employed to tell a story about the man he was going to meet. Indeed, he'd been chosen to tell the whole story of this important man, this significant artist. But how, he wondered with a rush of terror, did you begin to do that? And most importantly, was he capable of it? Harry Johnson gazed out of the train window at the genteel English countryside, and he almost wept. If the newspapers were right, Britain was a crowded island, teeming with busy immigrants. Many were clinging to the sides, as on a little boat about to capsize. Meanwhile, everybody on board was so close together, they were beginning to turn on one another like trapped animals, particularly since the financial crash. With the coming scarcity, no jobs, pensions, security, things would only deteriorate. The safety Harry had grown up with was gone. Not only that, it was said that there were thousands of asylum seekers and refugees and immigrants at the borders, desperate to get into Britain. Some were packed in lorries, others hung from the undercarriages of trains. Many were tiptoeing across the channel on tightropes, slung across the sea, while others were fired from cannons based in Boulogne. Children were strapped to the bodies of pigeons and sent across to Canterbury. Ghosts had it easy. But to Harry now, it seemed as if the government was injecting a strong shot of anxiety into the body politic, because all he could see was a green and pleasant England, neat fields, trimmed trees, bubbling streams, and the kind sky above it all. It didn't look as though you could get a curry for miles. Harry heard a whoosh. Beer spattered his face. He turned his head. Rob Devereux, sitting opposite Harry and cracking open another tin, was an editor at a respected and innovative publishing house. Not long ago, he had approached Harry with the idea of commissioning him to write a biography of the distinguished immigrant writer, the Indian-born Mamoon Azam. A novelist and essayist Harry had admired since he was a teenage book fiend, a nerdy connoisseur of sentences, a kid for whom writers were heroes, gods, rock stars. Harry was immediately excited and responsive. After years of study and obedience, things were turning good for him, as his teachers had said they would, if he concentrated his thoughts, zipped his fly and his lip. This was his break, and he wanted to weep with relief. He deserved it, he reckoned. Not long before, in his late 20s, Harry had published a well-received biography of Nehru, containing much new material, And although the familiar story had now, in the modern manner, to be lightly spiced with interracial copulation, buggery, alcoholism, and anorexia, the work was considered on the whole to be subtle and illuminating. Even Indians liked it. For Harry, it had been homework. Now he was reviewing and teaching while waiting to begin on a new project, something in which he could invest his creative passion, his energy, his commitment, something he hoped that would make his name, launching him into the public world. So today, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, Harry and Rob were on the train to Taunton to visit Mamoon at the house where the legendary writer had lived for most of his adult life. He shared it now with his new wife, Liana, a spirited Italian woman in her early 50s. Rob had no doubt that Mamoon would help Harry, since Mamoon had finally agreed that the book was a good, if not essential, idea. Liana was proving to be extravagant, if not more expensive and indeed more explosive than any woman Mamoon had experienced before. Rob had said it was as if Gandhi had married Shirley Bassey and they'd gone to live in Ambridge. There was no doubt about it. If the book was a success, he would be set up for years. It would be his ticket to ride. But, he said, let's not get carried away. It'll be a fire walk. The old man will exasperate you with his stubbornness and with his taunting. His wife will definitely make you demented, and you might have to sleep with her. What? Why? Said Harry. It'll be worth it, said Rob, to get the story. And you're a pig with a keen snout when it comes to sniffing out the truffle of a woman. Let it be her. He went on. That clever, old, sly fox, Mamoon, he might seem dull and dead to you, and indeed to everyone, including his own family. He comes on like someone who has never knowingly given pleasure to a woman, but he's stolen a lot of enjoyment. He's been a dirty bastard, a thug, and possibly a murderer. He has, said Harry. How common is this knowledge? His ex-mistress, said Rob. His ex-mistress, a Baconian torso on a plank, is bitter as cancer and spitting gobbets of hate to this day. She lives in America, and not only will she see you, she will fly at you like a radioactive bat. I've organized all this. Some people accuse me of being a perfectionist. And he drove his first wife over the edge. I'm sure he wrapped oranges in a towel and beat her blacker and bluer than a decayed Stilton. He did, said Harry. You must step up, dude, said Rob, as the train approached the station. Mamoon is ready for you, man. I have primed him. Primed him? Primed him in what sense? He's been told by all of us, said Rob, that you know your stuff. You stay up for nights without sleep reading the densest material. Hegel, Derrida, Gibbon, Longfellow. You said that? Longfellow? I had no choice, said Rob. I had to advertise you, Harry. You've said I understand Hegel. Well, said Rob, you're not an easy sell. I'm starting from zero here with you. But suppose, said Harry, suppose he asks me about Hegel. Well, said Rob, you'll have to give him an overview of the dialectic. What if I can't give him an overview of the dialectic, said Harry. What about my first book? Didn't he read that? Rob sighed. He said, it had its longeurs. Even your mother would agree. The old man struggled to get through the introduction, and then he had to lie down for a week with Suetonius to cleanse his palate. So, man, said Rob, you've got to reach the new level. You've got to reach the new level or you'll be so fucked, you'll have to get work as a journalist. Or as an academic. Or even worse. Worse, said Harry. What could be worse than a former polytechnic? Rob paused and glanced out of the window before delivering the news. You might have to teach creative writing, he said. Please, no, said Harry, please. Not that. I'm not qualified. Even better, said Rob. No one's qualified to teach creative writing. Imagine being lost in a dark forest of uncompleted first novels that require your total attention forever. The horror, the horror. I can see, said Rob, that has focused your mind. Thank you.
Well, Hanif, I'm sure lots of people who read the book sort of thought of one writer more than anybody else when they began to imagine the figure of Mamoon, but I'm sure you had no one in mind.
Hilary Mantel, I was thinking of.
I did feel, though, in reading it, that when you get through the 300 pages, the most difficult person in the book ends up having the best time. Is that how life usually works in your experience?
Who's having the best time in the book, in your view? Mamoon was I had a father, and my father had 10 brothers. So I grew up in a very large, mostly male Muslim family. So older Muslim men, to me, are like, daffodils are to Wordsworth, or miners to D.H. Lawrence. They're people I'm used to being with, and they're people I like describing. So it probably would be a mistake to think that Mamoon was any particular man, because when I was a kid in the suburbs, I was very impressed by these older men who would sit around gossiping, drinking, watching cricket, talking about politics, talking about literature, being funny, etc., etc., mostly in the King's Road of the 1960s. So this period was a very exciting time for me, and I was very impressed by these guys. And it seemed to me that the way they lived was a very good example for me, a younger man then. They were writers who really enjoyed talking, and they enjoyed living. But at the same time, probably according to their wives, there was probably something rather monstrous about them. And I have to say, writing the monstrous characters is always more fun than writing nice characters. There's nothing more dull than goodness. The banality of goodness, I call it. And when you're writing the monstrous characters, it's always, you write a bit and then you write another bit and you think, my God, then he did that. Oh my God, and then he's going to do that. And it's really fun to do. And obviously those characters in literature are always the most fun to read. So he does have a good time in the book, sometimes at the expense of other people. I guess I've always really admired people who, on the whole, do and say whatever they like. Being a very inhibited person, rather nervous fellow myself, I admire people who are the opposite of that, who have no fear of what other people think. So I guess, to a certain extent, Mamoon is a character like that.
We are supposed to believe in the book that Mamoon is a great artist, so I meant to ask you of what the particular difficulties were of trying to represent that in a book. How much could we know about Mamoon? Did we ever get through to his writing? Or was it just that we took the view of him that the world seemed to have at this point in his life?
Well, yes, as you suggest, if you're writing about a man who's supposed to be a good writer, you can't really give many examples of his writing, which might then seem, as you suggest, to be rather foolish. You just have to take it for granted that on the whole people think he's a good writer. I've spent my life writing. I wanted to be a writer since I was 14 or 15 years old. It's all I want to do, and I still want to do it. Every day when I get up, I still want to write stuff down, and I have ideas all the time. And many of my friends are writers, and I guess I read stuff all the time, so that has been my world. So writing a book about writers and what we do, what it means, and whether or not it's important or matters in the world, is something I wanted to think about with this book.
Well, inside the book, we could quickly realize, because the biography, the protagonist, Harry Johnson, moves to Mamoon's house, and most of the action in the book takes place in his residence, Prospect's house, where Mamoon lives with his Italian wife. Inside the book, we quickly see that in this little universe, it's kind of a madhouse, and everyone's skating on very thin ice with Mamoon. One never knows when he's in a good mood or not, and he has everything around his little finger. At the same time, I felt in the book, we repeatedly feel as if we know what's going on, and you found many little touches here and there where the rug is pulled out underneath the reader's feet as well. We feel like we have a handle on Harry. We even feel we kind of know midway through the book who Mamoon is. He's a slightly boring, self-obsessed old man. And yet, many of the most remarkable conversations in the book come right after that point when Harry and Mamoon sit down. And Mamoon's lovers begin to speak about him. And we've kind of come to expect that when Harry goes to interview all these women who are very bitter about Mamoon, that he'll just get a load of very sarcastic, very one-dimensional opinion, but they say all these kinds of wonderful things about him, which we suddenly have this new view from very distant figures in his past. I thought it was well put together.
I guess the question is, where is somebody? Where are they? How would you know somebody? As you suggest, if you wanted to know somebody, it might be a good idea to ask other people about them. After all, one's own estimations of oneself. There would be nothing more absurd than an autobiography. If you wanted to ask somebody whether they were a nice man, it would be absurd to ask them personally if they were a nice man. So yes, we build up a picture of this man from the people around him, from his work, and so on. I think this question of knowing other people, or where would you find them, or how would you have access to the truth about them, or is there a truth about anybody, and so on, in terms of a biography. I wanted to think about that. I don't know if knowing somebody is the most interesting thing that you can do with them. It might be, let's say, more interesting just to enjoy them. I certainly feel that about works of art, or I certainly feel that about music. In the end, you love the work of Chuck Berry. I don't necessarily want to know more and more about Chuck Berry in order to enjoy Chuck Berry's music more. In fact, I might enjoy Chuck Berry's music less the more I know, for instance, about Chuck Berry. So questions of biography and knowing are always interesting.
What did you enjoy writing more, constructing the world's view of Mamoon or Mamoon's view of the world?
Why I wanted to write this story was because I liked the structure. You know, when you're writing something, what you really look for, you want to see the beginning, and if you're lucky, you can see the end. Okay, and then you've got a setup. I wrote a film recently that was released called Le Weekend, and it was a very good structure for me because at the beginning of the weekend there's an old couple. They go to Paris, and at the end of the weekend they fuck off back on the train from Paris back to London. That was the structure, and in between they spend the weekend in Paris. And that really helped me then focus the story. With this story, a man goes to the house to write a biography of this man. At the end of the story, he does or doesn't complete the book. So that was a good structure. There are two men basically at the center of the book, and the girlfriends and partners of the men are involved. So the structure really helped me get the story going. As I get older, I find it easier now I really want to know the end when I start. I don't want to, probably like a lot of writers, I spent a lot of time writing things that were never done, that were never finished. It seemed a really good idea at the time. You kick off, but you actually don't get anywhere. So I like to get a sense of the whole story now when I write. And actually I've changed my view. With my students, I would always encourage them just to start and see where it goes. But of course, I don't take my own advice. When I'm writing, I kind of want to get a sense of the whole thing, if possible.
At the center of the plot is this delicious irony that actually, as soon as we know Mamoon, we see he's the kind of man who really doesn't care at all what the world thinks of him. And yet, because he has this new wife with expensive new tastes, he has to sort of agree to this biography being written of him. And he has to agree to give some of himself away for the purposes of the book. Yet, when it comes down to the actuals of encounters, he really just is always on the run from his biographer, even within his own house. And through that, you set up many interesting scenes where Harry begins to concentrate, as it were, on the periphery of Mamoon, on the people, the servants in his household. And through that, he begins to learn lots of interesting things, isn't it?
Yeah. He gets to know, I guess, as I say, if you want to know a man, you might want to get a sense of the people around him. So he gets to know his wife. He gets to know the staff who work in the property. He gets to know the children of the wife who work in the property. And so gradually he begins to, through this, as you say, this sort of intricate knowledge, to build up a picture of this man. And he builds up a picture of this man, as it were, against this man's wishes. This man doesn't want to be known. And I can see why. It wouldn't necessarily make his work look better or illuminate his work in any way, but it might advance the career of the biographer. The man doesn't want to be known. It's a story about two men arguing about women.
It is, and a lot of the time in your work, there's this a younger man speaking to an older man about life and about love and sex. But I think in the beginning, what's very nice about the book is that Harry really doesn't think Mamoon has much to teach him in that regard. In fact, it seems as if Mamoon kind of envies him his success with young women. And Mamoon has got himself painted into a corner with this wife. But as the book moves outwards, we begin to see that Mamoon is a kind of hit as well in his own peculiar, cussed way with all the girls.
It's two men jousting. One man asking another man difficult questions. Probably asking him questions that he would never ask himself. And the older man's life, because of these questions, I guess, begins to deconstruct, begins to unravel. And he begins to think about himself and his past differently. It's a comedy of unraveling.
Well, I was wondering if you wanted to read a bit more from the middle of the book. I was thinking of that wonderful scene in the library when Harry and Mamoon begin to talk about...
Which bit?
Well, some of the best lines of Mamoon, I see no reason why people shouldn't know.
From where to where?
From that to the next page.
To there. Would it be possible for us to chat a little today? Whispered Harry, pleased to have found Mamoon in the library. To Harry's surprise, Mamoon said, yes, why not? I'm keen, though he did glance at Harry's clipboard as if it were his death certificate. Do you, said Mamoon, have any exciting questions for me? I wondered if you might feel invigorated, said Harry, after your morning massage. Mamoon said, my skin is singing, and you have put me in the unfortunate position of having to think about you, something I've been very reluctant to do. Think about me, said Harry. Think about it in what way? You're surprised? Gobsmacked, sir. Good, Mamoon said. Your fascination with the female body isn't unnatural or unusual. In fact, the body of the young woman is the world's most significant object, admired and desired by homosexuals, of course, as well as by other women, babies, lesbians, children, fashion designers, and men. No wonder Muslims hide the woman like a filthy picture, while their fundamentalists remind us that female sexuality is the biggest problem of all. For these people, the woman is already a whore. They're right to be so concerned, he went on. The young female body is at the center of the world, and usually at the center of most elections. Abortion, single mothers, maternity leave, prostitution, incest, abuse, the hijab. The woman is where we all come from and where we all want to go. The woman's body makes knowledge disappear. It's amazing that anyone has time to think about philosophy, literature, psychology, or history. Women know it too, which is why they hurry on the street. No beautiful woman is a slow walker. Ah, said Harry. When did you first get interested in this? Adjusting his digital recorder, but not repressing record yet. I can remember, said Mamoon, as a young man in Madras, reading something by Bertrand Russell, who was famous for knowing everything, and then he was a huge passion of mine. He wrote somewhere, said Mamoon, of his emotional life being irrational. By God, he disapproved of the irrational. Russell's loves, his hates, his desires, the entire bodily caboodle, and all the greatest philosopher in the world could say about it was that it was irrational. It made me want to say my say, as if the whole thing still required explaining, to hunt down these irrational people, the ones so powerful in the world, and to hear their speech. But what is the cure, sir? Halt, said Mamoon. Halt your naughty finger on the recording button before I crash it. Do not record this. It is between only us. You asked for the cure. I presume the cure for excessive appetite. Yes. Well, I'm not going to tell you what the cure is.
That's great. When I was reading this, I felt that part of the pleasure of reading you always has been that you get a lot of thinking done in very small spaces. And in this book, you have somebody else other than the narrator, Mamoon, who also has the same kind of thing. So you can zip across from the world from outside Mamoon, looking at Mamoon, and then you have these little moments where he has these little monologues. And many of them are wonderful. But I thought also what was very ingenious about it was that at some point, Mamoon and Harry both envy some things about each other. It's actually a very equal relationship. Harry envies Mamoon's success in literature and his authority, but Mamoon envies Harry's youth and particularly his girlfriend, Alice.
Yes. Yes. Well, they're both. I was very interested in writing the book around conversation, as you say. It seems to me that conversation is almost always dangerous. I love the idea of conversation being, obviously, you don't know what you're going to say next. You don't know what the other person is going to say next. They can surprise you. They can shock you. So these two men who don't particularly interest one another, the biographer and his subject, can also find quite soon that they can drive each other mad, that they can expose themselves to one another, you might say. So it's a book about, you might say, male homosexual love, in which the main protagonists talk about women and are fascinated by women and fascinated by one another's lovers or girlfriends or partners. And it seemed a very good subject to me. I was thinking the other day that one of the things, the thing that we do most, the thing we do most in the world, the thing that we do most of the time, and the thing that we do that is most probably important to all of us, is talking, is speech, is language, is conversation. And you might say that to be born a human being, you might say, is to be born into language. And the first thing that is done to us as kids, as babies, is that we are spoken to. We are spoken to by our mother, by our aunties and our grandmother and our father and our relatives. And then they say to you, you look like your uncle, no, you look like your mummy, you're going to be an engineer, no, you're going to be a nurse, and so on and so on. So we exist in a world of language, of conversation. We're born into a world of speech. And I wanted to write a book, I guess, about people speaking and how important and how important it is and how it can change you.
Yes, Rob says in the book, language is the only enchantment we have, which I thought was one of the very nice moments in it. I meant to ask you, since you're speaking about conversation, something more technical about it. You've written a lot for film as well. And what to you is the difference between writing dialogue in screenplays and that in books? Or is there, in principle, no difference?
Well, I write movies, I write novels, I write essays, and I write stories. I try and write movies in the hope of making a living and supporting my family, which is very difficult to do as a writer, however successful you are. And I write novels because I enjoy to write them and because you have complete control over what you're doing when you write a novel. But mostly movies are dialogue. You write the scenes, but all the people are doing in a movie is talking. And the talking has to be a form of action. And I guess I think of novels in a similar kind of way. What happens when these two people meet? What happens to change them? How do they modify their lives? And how through words can they change one another? I was thinking the other day that the only animals who talk when they're having sex are obviously human beings. Insects, but barely have conversations. And I thought that was an interesting fact. That one of the things that you want to do when you're having sex or making love with someone is to hear their voice, is to have them speak to you.
Well, Hanif, no one would ever accuse you of writing an unadult book, and of course, one of the grave realities of adult life, which sometimes people in your books are trying to forget, and yet they are reminded all the time, is children. And I think part of the reason why Harry envies Mamoon is that Harry's going to become a father very soon, and of twins too. And Mamoon, very early on in his life, made it clear to all his lovers that he was not going to be a father to any of the children.
Yeah.
And there's a point in the book where Harry goes to meet Marion, an old lover of Mamoon's in America, and she was already married and gave up her family to imagine a life with Mamoon, which never happened. And she says at one point, I regret now because my children don't speak to me anymore, and the woman must not bolt. And when I read that bit, I remember that bit from your earlier novel, Intimacy, where it's written in the first person with a man who's just about to leave his family, and that character says it's the man who must leave. I wonder, what do you think is the relationship in gender between these two positions, where you want to leave a family you've set up?
Intimacy was a novel I wrote in, when did I write it?
96?
96, 97. About a couple breaking up. And I thought it was very important to write this book because I guess most novels, most stories, most movies are about people meeting. Most stories, most novels, and particularly most movies are about people falling in love. And I didn't think that was very interesting. I thought it was interesting, and it might be one of the things that you might have to teach your children. And an important knowledge to have, which is knowing how to leave people, or when is the right time to leave people. Leaving people has to be an art, and it's obviously one of the most difficult things that you have to do. It's interesting, I thought about my kids who are late teenagers. I thought, well, you're not going to fall in love when you're 20 and be married to the same person when you're 90. I'm sure that you'll have many relationships in your life, that you'll fall in love many times, and indeed those relationships will end too. And I thought that the way in which, and I said this to them, the way in which they end is also important. That you understand that relationships run their course, they have to end, and you understand that when they end they also become violent in some way, emotionally violent, that the other person may hate you and you may hate them, that this is a natural process and a way in which it might help you to, as it were, to get away from someone to begin a new life alone or a new life with someone else. So writing books about leaving, writing books about separation or about the art of separation or the ability to leave somebody or the ability, let's say, to bear the difficulty and pain of doing it.
You did in there.
I think to be a writer or to be an artist, you expose yourself, you know? If you're an actor, you get up on stage and you do stuff in front of other people. If you're a singer or a dancer, the same. If you're a painter or a writer, you're one of those people who believes that showing themselves, in a sense, is uniting you with other people. That you might write a book about how you had to leave somebody, that somebody might read this book and may think about how they might have to leave somebody. And that art, in some sense, unites us with other people. So I think if you were a writer and you were bothered about, say, somebody thinking, is this you, is this your mother, is this your dad, is your life, if that worried you, it would be a good idea that you wouldn't become a writer. I mean, as soon as you make a line on a page, as soon as you write your name, as soon as you write a sentence, it's going to be you. It's going to be your sentence. It's going to be your soul. It's going to be your authenticity. And if you can't bear to be exposed in that kind of way, it might be better to work in a shop.
It has can't have passed anyone's attention that there's a lot of sex in your books, but a lot of it's people talking about sex. There aren't a lot of a lot of sex scenes in a way. And I wonder if you felt, I think one of the best things I ever read on the subject was this writer called Alberto Manguel, who said it's very hard to write sex scenes very convincingly in the English language because of the vocabulary you have in front of you. Do you think, or what do you think about this?
Well, I think the most interesting thing about sex is not necessarily the positions that the couple, indeed, if it's a couple, indeed it might be an orgy. It's not necessarily the positions that they adopt that are the most interesting thing or the most telling thing about it, which is why pornography, you know, is so banal and uninteresting. For a short time in the 70s, I wrote pornography, but it didn't really suit me as a form because it's very conventional. You know what's going to be happening at the beginning, and you know what's going to happen at the end. It's very unusual in pornography for the scene to end, let's say, with the man, let's say, being impotent. Or the man or the woman slapping him across the face saying, "I've always hated you, you bastard." And I did occasionally try to write pornography along those lines. And it was rejected by the publisher. So it's a very conventional form. There isn't anything you can do with it. I mean, what's interesting about sexuality, I grew up in the 1950s and I grew through the 1960s. So I grew up in a very, to put it very, very simply, in a really dull time that became a very exciting time, and in the 1970s became an even more exciting time. And now I think the way we think about sexuality has become really dull again. We live in a world, let's say, of generalized pornography and perversion. And I think the whole thing has become rather dull. But I think one of the things that we have to do as artists is write, let's say, a history of the libido, or write a history of sexuality. So when I think of the so-called sex books I read when I was a kid, let's say like Lady Chatterley's Lover, or Henry Miller, or even Lolita, for instance. And we think about the way we think and write about sexuality now, it's obviously changed a lot. So it seems to me that to write about this most primal and fundamental thing about human beings, that they want to make love to other people, that seems to me, and this takes place in a social context, this seems to me to be really important and necessary that we do this, all the time. But we should do it in terms of the way people experience it, and the way they experience it mostly, I would say, in their minds, let's say, as well as in their bodies, the way they think about it, and the way in which your sexuality would or would not change your life. I don't think describing sexual positions really is very interesting or very illuminating, or is, as you say, or there is a way to do it that doesn't make you look like an idiot as a writer.
Yes. Who to you were, in the 20th century, the other great writers on the subject of man-woman relations or sexual relations, who thought most deeply about it?
There's a wonderful novel of perversion, a wonderful novel by Tanizaki. I don't know if any of you know a wonderful novel called The Key. It really, which is fantastic. He also read another great book called Diary of an Old Man. Again, a novel about perversion, about a woman, about a man who likes, who's in love with women's feet, and he wants them to walk up and down on top of him. And on his gravestone, he has these footprints engraved. And I used the basis of this novel, Diary of an Old Man, as my film Venus. In which Peter O'Toole falls in love with a beautiful young woman played by Jodie Whittaker. But I would say it's mostly the cinema rather than literature that we can really learn and think about sexuality. The other place is mostly, of course, is psychoanalysis and philosophy. But there aren't many pictures in those books.
You have a particular interest in psychoanalysis, and that comes through in The Last Word as well, where many of the characters in the book at some point, and for short or long periods of time, submit to therapy. Do you think that psychoanalysis has something in common with literature, that Freud was, among other things, a very great writer?
Well, psychoanalysis came out of literature, of course, and Freud, of course, was fascinated by Shakespeare, and of course Sophocles, the Oedipus Complex is right at the center. And I consider literature, in which I include poetry and drama and so on, psychoanalysis and philosophy, really to be one thing, which is an investigation of the psyche and of human relationships, of what it is to be a child, what it is to have sex, what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, what it is to love someone else, what it is to be political, what is it to be violent, what is it to be aggressive, and so on. It seems to me that psychoanalysis, philosophy, literature, drama, poetry, all of them are addressing these central and most important questions. I read philosophy at university, but halfway through the philosophy course I realized that psychoanalysis, and I was taught by Richard Wollheim, who was a Kleinian and wrote a very good book about Melanie Klein and about Freud. I realized that psychoanalysis was much more interesting and alive, in fact, than philosophy was. So for me, all those things are concerned with exactly the same thing, really, which is the human subject, but the human subject who speaks, with speech, with language, with this incredibly unusual and odd thing that animals and no other subjects could possibly do, which is what we do all the time, which is to speak.
Well, Hanif, I've been very lucky to be able to ask you so many questions. Now it's time for you people to ask, sadly, one and a very short one for each one of you. Whoever would like to ask a question, please raise your hands and we can go through. Yes, you there, please.
The question is slightly unrelated to the book. You teach creative writing, Hanif, and Chandrahas, you have attended IWW. And so my question was whether your protagonist consider MFA and why not?
I teach creative writing. I guess I learned to be a writer through other people. I never attended a course, but I was taught to write by my father. I was taught to write by the editors I work with. I was taught to write by Stephen Frears and the film directors I've worked with. I'm still taught to write by the books I read and by the conversation I have with other writers. And I teach writing. I'm not very keen on university courses, on official courses, but I really believe that the writers can learn, that you can become better writers. You can become a better writer by the conversations you might have about writing with somebody else. You might, let's say, learn a lot about structure, or you might learn a lot about plot from working with a film director, because film directors, for instance, really have to think about that stuff a lot. And I was always very weak on plot and structure. I was always keener on jokes and character and stuff like that. So I teach creative writing, and in one sense I believe in it, and in another sense I don't believe in it. I can make my students more talented, but I can't make them into geniuses, but I can help them. And the other thing you can do as a teacher of creative writing is save people time, you know? You can see they're about to embark on something that's going to be an absolute disaster. And they are entitled to embark on something that may well be a disaster, but it might be smart of you to warn them, and then they will have that knowledge. They may then decide to go ahead with that, but that's entirely up to them. So I'm really interested in teaching. I think the main thing about creative writing is that we're encouraging people to speak. You know, we're not turning people into great writers, but we're encouraging them to speak. What they want to do is to write their version of A House for Mr. Biswas. What they want to do is describe their childhoods. What they want to do is describe their parents. What they want to do is describe the trauma of what they've been through, they've dragged through, of something which is horrible and terrible, called a childhood. And they've emerged at the age of 25, and they suddenly think, what the hell has happened to me? What have I experienced? Why was it so terrible? Why was it so wonderful? Can I think about it differently? And I think when they begin to write about that, they might begin to think about their lives differently. They might not ever write a book as good as, let's say, A House of Mr. Biswas, but they might begin to think about their lives differently, and that might be something worth encouraging.
Who's next? Yes, you, sir.
So, probably one of my favourite scenes in literature is written by you. It's the scene at the very end of the short story "Remember This Moment, Remember Us," when the couple brings the child comes into the picture that the couple are trying to create. This is something I wanted to ask a writer that I admire. Do you have one scene in your work that sort of stands out as one you're particularly fond of? You can just say no.
No, thank you for saying that. This gentleman has just described. I think there's what happens is they get what do? They get a camera, and they photograph each other.
They don't really know what to say, and they're sat there mumbling into the camera when the boy walks forward and sits in their lap and looks at the camera. And you just know that 25 years in the future, this kid's going to look at this video which they've done nothing prepared for. It's going to break his heart, and it's going to be the most beautiful thing he's ever seen. And you say it best when you say nothing at all. That thing makes me cry every time I read it, mate. That's it.
Well, I'm so pleased that you should say that, because I was I remember that. I remember it, and I've forgotten it, that I've written that. And it is very moving. The story's called Remember Us, Remember This Moment. Remember this, yes. There's a wonderful scene, although I say it myself because I'm not responsible for it. There's a wonderful scene in a film I wrote called Venus, with Vanessa Redgrave and Peter O'Toole. And he's dying, and Vanessa Redgrave is his first wife. And Peter O'Toole goes back to see his first wife, to apologize to her, to see her for the last time, and to say to her, I loved you, and I'm sorry it didn't work out, but remember that I love you, and so on. And it's Peter O'Toole and Vanessa Redgrave. And of course, you look at this scene thinking, that's Vanessa Redgrave and that's Peter O'Toole. On the other hand, you also believe it's these characters. And it's a very simple scene. There's nothing in the dialogue. It's just this a man who once loved this woman and doesn't love her anymore. She brought up his children, and he's apologizing to her about something. And you asked me about scenes, I guess, that I would imagine that I'm proud of. Well, I didn't make that scene. I just wrote the scene. I wrote, he goes to her and he kisses her and says goodbye to her. But when I watched that scene, it seems to me to be very, very beautiful. And whenever I see that, I think it wasn't such a bad life. It wasn't a wasted life being a writer. But thank you for reminding me of that scene in that story. That's wonderful.
We have another question. Yes, Ivan.